Assalamualaikum and good day to Dr. Jun and my fellow classmates. So today my group and I will present about Karl Marx theory of history for our assignment 1. So these are the content that I are going to present to you. The early socialist critics of classical economics preached dramatic reform. Their objection to capitalism as its elite evil was moral. For example, utopian socialists did not think that violence, revolution should be used to change the capitalist system. They did not believe that any form of class struggle or social revolution is necessary for socialism to emerge. Instead, they used moderate ways to persuade the capitalists to combat poverty and equalize the gap between rich and poor. In other words, utopian socialists wished to modify classical liberalism, not overturn the system that supported it. Karl Marx, the leader of Marxian socialism, dismissed that approach. Utopian socialism. Utopia meaning by utopia is ideal world. Socialism means system in which the society as a whole owns the means of production. For example, factories, farm equipment, land, etc. Early socialists include Robert Owen, Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, aim to combat poverty and equalize the gap between rich and poor by providing basic needs for all members of society. If all members of society are provided for, there should be less conflict. Marx shared the early socialist moral outrage against contemporary capitalism, their sharp criticism of classical political economy, and their socialist vision of future society. However, he believed that socialism would not be forthcoming until the condition of the working class deteriorated to the point of open rebellion. He believed that capitalism had internal contradictions that would ensure its eventual demise. Marx articulated a comprehensive critique of capitalism as well as a dialectical process by which capitalism will be overthrown, which is theory of history and law of motion. Karl Marx believed that social revolution was unavoidable within advanced capitalist countries. He and his compatriot Friedrich Engels advocated that the workers of the world unite to hasten this event. Marx's theory of history provides a framework for analyzing human society and the laws of its development. In developing his theory of history, Marx were influenced by, first, David Ricardo, the classical school. Second, early or moderate socialists, for example, Christian socialism, utopian socialism, and etc. Third is Darwin, theory of evolution and natural selection. Fourth, Hegel, dialectical process, and the last but not least, Feuerbach, philosophical materialism. The objection of this assignment is to discuss Marx's biographical detail, the intellectual influence on his writing, Karl Marx's theory of history, relation of production versus force of production, and also 6 stages of society's development in Karl Marx's theory of history.
Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera to Dr. Jun and my fellow friends. My name is HAZWANI binti SARWOEDY 269919. Before we go deeper with the formations of Karl Marx's theory of history, I'm going to present about his biographical. As you can see in the slide, I already divide 4 parts of him, which are his personal and education background, work experiences, and his writing. First, his background. Karl Marx, or his full name, Karl Heinrich Marx, was born 5 May 1818 in Prussia, Germany. He is a son of successful Jewish lawyer, and married with his wife, a theater critic and political activist, Jenny von Westphalen, in 1843. Unfortunately, he died on 14 March 1883 due to illness and was buried at Highgate Cemetery in London. As we know, Karl Marx is a German philosopher and he got doctorate philosophy in University of Jena at 23 years old. Back then, he also studied law and history respectively in University of Bonn and Berlin. According to his knowledge and expertise, he managed to be as editor of liberal newspaper in Cologne. He also been experienced as an author of New York Tribune. Despite of his liberal and criticism, he was exiled from Germany to Paris and finally stayed in London. Finally, there are 3 books that been published during his life. First is Manifesto of Communists 1848, second is Das Kapital in 1867, and third is Theories of Surplus Value 1863. Manifesto of the Communist Party 1848. This book critiquing one class of people would end the problem of continuous class struggles and cycles of revolution between the bourgeois and proletariat classes, which never lead to true reform. This writing was a collaboration with Engels. Engels also a financial supporter to Karl Marx. Das Kapital in 1867, which is his first volume of magnum opus. The book addresses the nature of communities, wages, and the worker-capitalist relationship. Marx argues that the capitalist system is ultimately unstable because it cannot endlessly sustain profits. Theories of Surplus Value of Karl Marx in 1863 were published by Karl Kautsky. This writing consists of 3 volumes. Kautsky's first volume of Marx Notes deal with the theories of surplus value up to Adam Smith. The second volume with David Ricardo in 2 parts, and the final one with the breakup of the Ricardian school and Volga economics. Intellectual influences. There are 3 of intellectuals that influence Karl Marx's theory of history, which are Charles Darwin with his theory of evolution and natural selection, George Hegel of the dialectical process, and Ludwig Feuerbach on philosophical materialisms. First, let's talk about the Charles Darwin biographical and connection. Charles Darwin was born on 12 February 1809 in United Kingdom and he died on 19 April 1882. He was studied anatomy in Christ's College, Cambridge from 1882 until 1831. Charles Darwin was known as English naturalist and rich intellectual environment with biology, human psychology, anatomy, zoology, and medical field until he been awarded on Fellow of the Royal Society, Copley Medal, Wollaston Medal, and Royal Medal. That is all about Charles Darwin biographical. Next, I will pass to Yi Qian to present the Darwinian connection.
Thank HAZWANI and good day, madam. My name is Yi Qian, matrix number 270016. Now, let me explain a little bit further on the Darwinian connection in particular. I will share how Charles Robert Darwin had an influence over Marx's thoughts on political economy. So through Darwin's book On the Origin of Species, Marx sees similarities with his own thoughts on the political economy. The book concludes that natural selection takes place where favorable variations tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones destroyed. Natural selection causes populations to become more adapted or increasingly well-suited to their environments over time. It also depends on the environment and requires existing heritable variation in a group. In essence, the results of natural selection was evolution of species. Secondly, for Marx, the current organizational relationships in the economy, such as the current biological organisms, are the result of past changes. And therefore, in Marx's theory of history, the material forces of production namely the technology, types of capital, skill level labor are dynamic, where you can also see from the slides, all three of the material forces of production are actually correlated in the triangular shape. Darwin does influence Marx, but in reinforcing Marx's perspective that dynamic, as opposed to static, analysis is the route to true understanding. I'll share a little bit on George Hegel as well. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was a German philosopher who was widely known for his analytical and interdisciplinary theories. Born on the 27th of August 1770 in Stuttgart, Germany, he spent the years from 1788 to 1793 as a student nearby Tübingen, studying first philosophy, then theology. Through those years, he has completed his Master of Arts in the University of Tübingen and completed a PhD in the University of Jena. His main interest encompasses metaphysics, epistemology, nature philosophy, philosophy history, and political philosophy. Hegel was a huge advocate for the preservation of ideas, arguing that we need to preserve ideas because time passes and never stops. For Hegel, the speculative moment or synthesis was crucial because it was born out of preservation. The simple idea in dialectics that differs from the usual thinking process or discussion is that the original idea or original statement is not completely null-filled. It is merely a contradiction that leads to another topic or idea. Hegel's different way of thinking has become known as dialectical thinking. So what exactly is Hegel's dialectical process? It's defined as an interpretive method in which the contradiction between proposition and its antithesis is resolved at a higher level of truth. In short, there are a total of three main elements, namely the thesis, which is the starting point or the original statement of an idea. Second element, the antithesis as the mechanism for challenge, which often draws on new data. Lastly, the synthesis, which is about resolving the apparent contradiction between a thesis and an antithesis. Now moving on to the dialectical materialism, clear equation sums up the Hegelian dialectical model, which is the thesis plus antithesis equals to synthesis. To break it down more concisely and clearly, in the capitalist stage, thesis refers to owners who control the means of production where it stood at the very beginning of the equation. The thesis is also referred to as the moment of understanding. In simple terms, this is the first statement that put forward in an argument. Next, antithesis refers to proletariat who labor produces the wealth of the capitalists. The thesis is also referred to as the moment of understanding. In simpler terms, this is the first statement to put forward in an argument. Finally, the synthesis in the model equates to socialism, which simply means a classless society with no discrimination and marks the end of history eventually. The synthesis is also referred to as the positive rationale. The particular term was the new addition. The synthesis is a statement that arises from the thesis and the antithesis and continues the discussion.
Greetings, my name is Jeffrey, metric number 269474 from Group 1. So without any delay, I would like to discuss about the third influences to the Karl Marx theory of history, which is Ludwig Andreas von Feuerbach. Ludwig Feuerbach is a famous German philosopher who was born in July 28 in the year of 1804 in Landshut, Germany. In his first 20s, Feuerbach abandoned theological studies and started to become a student who studied philosophy under Georg Hegel for 2 years at Berlin. Eventually, he received his doctorate at the University of Erlangen in 1828. He is also best known as an anthropologist with his book The Essence of Christianity, which published since 1890s. His book provided a critique towards Christianity, not only gave a huge impact to the conventional thinkers, but also influenced several generations of new thinkers, including Karl Marx. By this, he became a notable idealist religion as the outward projections of human inner nature. Feuerbach's philosophy emphasized that the materialism must be a true matter, a real things, or the word of reality, and against to the realm of ideas, which comes from the idealism. As he wrote in his book, The Essence of Christianity, Feuerbach distinguished between reality and fantasy. He argued that God is only a creation of man and that the qualities people attribute to God is actually the real qualities of humanity. He also believed that all the supernatural comes from the product of human imaginations. Based on his concept, Feuerbach considered the worship of individuals to those deities as if they were supernatural or divine is actually, in reality, those deities are created by humans themselves and give them humanity qualities instead of a physical real things or a reality. Therefore, to Feuerbach, history is the process through which people came to know and accept reality by using their sense perceptions instead of people's unlimited imaginations. Feuerbach also think that the religion which bring unreal happiness for people are needed to be abolished for a better advancement of human being in the future. Alright, so now we had completed to introduce the three influences for Karl Marx's theory of history. In summarize, to create his own theory of history, Karl Marx had referred to these three influences of theory, including Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection, Hegel's dialectical process, and the Feuerbach philosophical materialism, which I stated just now. At first, on the political economy and the Darwin's book, which introduced the idea of evolutionary and natural selection. It could be said that Darwin influenced Marx by reinforcing Marx's perspectives that dynamic analysis is the route to true understanding of the economics, as opposed to the static. Secondly, Marx accept and modify Hegel's notion to formulate his own theory of historical materialism. The concept of three-step thesis has been utilized by Marx to create his own theory in which an original idea is opposed by a contrary idea, and the interactions between the original idea and contrary idea produces a new idea which then becomes the new thesis. In fact, the 6 stages of Karl Marx's theory of history that will be presented in the next slide are created by the Hegel's dialectical approach. And the last but not least, Karl Marx also agreed with the Feuerbach's concept of philosophical materialism, in which centralized the importance of material realities. Marx proposed a view of the human being is indeed to create or at least transform the world, but these transformations should not happen just in thoughts or fantasy. Instead, transformations of the world must go through the actual activity and physical material. Also, Marx agreed with the statement of Feuerbach, where the unrealistic religion has to be abolished for the sake of human improvement and the real happiness. In 1844, Marx wrote, "Religion is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is required for their real happiness." Alright, so that's it. That's all from me. I will pass it to my colleagues. Thank you.
A very good day to Doctor and everyone. Today I'll be presenting about the Marx theory of history. So basically there are 6 stages in this part. The very first one is primitive communism. Second, slavery. Third, feudalism. Fourth, capitalism. Then socialism, and the very last stage was communism. And I will be presenting about the first three stages of this part, and the remaining parts, which is capitalism, socialism, communism, will be presented by ATHIRAH. First of all, primitive communism. There are no antagonistic classes, no exploitations, and no class struggles during this stage. People in this stage promote common ownership in holding land, which means a land could be owned by a group of individuals instead of a person, and they jointly cooperated to make a skimpy living from the nature. Other than that, the production and division of labor is very low during that time. Workers can only satisfy their subsistence needs, thus they could not constantly produce a surplus that can be supplied to the market. Slavery and exploitation during that time is exactly impossible due to the toilers need to produce more than they must consume in order to survive. The workers perform the same economic function, which is hunter-gathering, which means they all have to work together as a team in order to produce common goods. During this stage, there was no private property and there was no classes. Next, as you all can see, here is a picture of the Native Americans. And the society of Native American before the arrival of the Europeans will be an excellent example of primitive communism. Since you all can see, the teamwork is very crucial during this stage. In order to survive, they have to work together in a team in order to produce things and make a living. The second stage, slavery. Slavery considered to be the beginning of class society where the private properties appears. People started to own personal property. Compared with primitive communism, the efficiency of production rose where the workers can produce more than their needs, meaning they started to produce a surplus. They can provide it to the market, and with this, the slavery become profitable. According to Marx, slavery was a dominant feature of the classical antiquity occurred in Hebrews, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, but not in US, which he felt was an anachronism existing within a capitalist society. They began the history of class antagonism, or class struggle, which was henceforth to be the fundamental feature of human history. Society in this stage has begun to be divided into classes, so the exploitations and class conflict rose. The exploiting class did not only own the tools and the means of production, the producer himself was considered to be the private property of the owner. Slavery has permitted a high development of the productive forces of society, but eventually it became a barrier for further progress. Agriculture sector in this stage has become better off since people learn how to cultivate plants and rear animals on a large enough scale to support large populations. Slavers were not the most highly motivated workers, and their rebellion shocked the society and tore it apart. From a Marxist perspective, slave society collapsed when it asserted itself. Eventually, the system was overthrown and replaced by feudalism. So here comes the third stage of Marx's theory of history, feudalism. A feudal society has four distinct social classes. The very top one, as you can see in the right hand side picture, is a king. Then below the king is lords. Then the third row will be knights, and the very low one will be serfs. Each of the levels depended on each other on their everyday life, but the king had total power over all things. The king got the position either by inheritance, marriage, or conquer their ways into the leadership. When the feudalism was completely developed, the Europeans benefited from it the most. According to Marx, the feudalism state is unique because the exploitations of the serf is most clearly visible. For example, under slavery stage, the slave appears to get nothing for their labor, even though they do receive subsistence. Under capitalism, the workers appear to be paid for all the hours they work, even though the capitalists actually appreciate parts of the labor time without payment. In the feudal system, serfs were allowed to work a few days per week on the land assigned to them, but were forced to work the other days on the lord's land. This was an obvious exploitation. Although the feudalism brought a higher development of society's forces of production, but the system limited further progress. Thus, it was overthrown and superseded by capitalism. Next, I will let ATHIRAH to continue her presentation.
The fourth stage, which is the capitalism. Capitalism replaced for feudalism. Even Marx hates capitalism. He paid tribute to the increase in productivity and production. In capitalism, there are two main groups, which is proletariat, who are wage laborers, working class, and then we have capitalists, who own the means of production, such as factories. Workers are depends on wages. Capitalists are depend on money, invest to create more money. Capitalists will pay worker a little just to keep him alive and productive, while the techniques of production become increasingly concentrated and centralized. The system of private ownership of capital becomes a barrier to further progress. Unemployment increase caused the worker to revolt. Working class success to overthrow the capitalism and establish its own dictatorship of the worker socialism. Fifth stage called socialism. So socialism is between capitalism and communism. It builds upon the previous system, which is capitalism, by nationalizing the means of production, like corporation, resources, and banks, but not by make everyone equal. Um, Profit motive and free market were eliminated as a major guiding force for the economy under socialism. Private property in consumer goods is permitted, but capital and land are publicly owned by the government. Based on socialist view, individuals do not live or work in isolation, but live in cooperation with one another. Everything that people produce is in some sense a social product, and everyone who contributes to the production of a good is entitled to a share in it. Socialism is from each according to their ability to each according to their work. There will be a dictatorship of the proletariat as workers. Organizations redistributed food, goods, and also services fairly according to the needs, and profits were shared by all. The middle classes would come to understand that equality was superior to private ownership. The dialectical process continues until finally the state withers away and pure communism prevails. Comes to the last stage, which is communism. Communism is extreme form of socialism which aims to set up classes, moneyless and stateless society, economic and social system in which all or nearly all property and resources are collectively owned by a classless society and not by individual citizens. Government has supreme authority through its total control of land and means uh, of production. Because the government distributes land and property among the people, communism sets a standard of equality, both economical and also socially. Communism is from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. Everyone would join together for the common good. Money and government would no longer be needed, and society would be classless. As all countries reach this stage, the world would become stateless and competition and war would cease. In all, Marx's theory of history provides a framework for analyzing human society and the laws of its development. Marx was influenced by Darwin, which is the natural selection, George Hegel, dialectical process, and Feuerbach, philosophical materialism, in developing his theory of history. For Marx, history is a process through which the static relations of production come into the eventual conflict with the dynamic forces of production. Conflict revolutionized the system. The new relation of production permit the higher development of the force of production. The mechanism for overthrowing all societies is the class struggle. Marx saw society evolving through six stages, which is mentioned just now. First, primitive communism. Second, we have slave society stage. Third, feudalism. Fourth, capitalism. Fifth, socialism. And the last but not least, communism. So that's all from our group. Thank you so much for hearing us.